Is that it? Okay. Hi, I'm Barton Bund, and this is INFrame. We've got an incredible show today. This is Michigan's film and television and media podcast, and we really like to just get in there with the artists and talk about how they do what they do. So we've got something really special. Later on in the program, we're going to be talking to Douglas Trumbull, who is the filmmaker and VFX legend who's worked on 2001: A Space Odyssey and The Tree of Life and Close Encounters and Blade Runner, and we got to really dig in with him, and so that's something special we'll be rolling out for you in just a short bit. But first, we have composer, songwriter, singer Liz Larin. Liz, welcome.
Thank you.
It's such a pleasure. Now,
so much fun.
I can think back to some of my favorite moments in film have had music. Have been set to music.
Yes.
And you working in so many different kinds of media, talk to us. You've been on kind of every side of it.
I have. I was a recording artist, and like many composers, originally the original composers had orchestral background. They knew how to work with orchestras, and then in about the 80s, you got people that had been in pop music, Hans Zimmer and guys like that, who said, wait, I can do scores, and then so they sort of evolved the genre. So
moving over to just a single person with a synthesizer and
yes. Yeah. So synthesizer backgrounds, rock backgrounds, world music backgrounds. So all these things are really coming into play now. Yeah. So
and where were you though? I mean, you've gone from writing music and sort of turning it over, not knowing how it's going to be used. You've also scored films originally. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. But first, we'd love to hear some of your stuff, and we'd love to hear about this project you've got going on, this 100 Days Madness that you've got going. Can you describe that project to us a little bit?
I'm doing a 100-day challenge, which means I'm doing 2 minutes of fully composed music per day.
At least 2 minutes.
Yes. So that's kind of like the writer who sits there looking at a blank page and says, oh, shoot, okay. So just doing it every single day. So after 100 days, I'm going to be just...
You'll have a lot of music.
I'm going to have a lot of brand new stuff. So I'm really forcing myself to try all kinds of different things.
Cool.
So.
Can you tell us about the first clip we're going to hear? Just tell us how that came about. This is very recent.
This was one I just did recently, and this is basically a mad chase scene. This is a spy idea, and so just kind of the scary sound design thing, because I'm a sound designer as well. So just kind of creating this very scary atmosphere of some tension, but
Great.
Yet it brings the electronic music into it. So
excellent. Let's hear that clip. This is Liz Larin. And I see what you mean. I mean, and you went in sort of knowing you had an idea in your head. You had I think, did you have a scene in your head?
Yes, and
okay.
Definitely using music to tell a side of the story that's not being shown in visuals. So really creating that.
And if you
that
swapped
will-
out those visuals with another song, you know that we would have something completely different.
Exactly, yeah.
And you're also playing all the instruments on this too. I want to emphasize that
Yes,
you're a
yes.
one-person machine, right?
Yes, I'm a one-man band.
Okay. Now, and in creating all these things, now tell us how you kind of put together this next clip that we're about to get into. Tell us how you put that one together, and it's pretty different.
It is.
This is also part of this 100
this
days.
100-day thing. So this is the one from a couple days ago, which is, I'm a big fan of Hans Zimmer, and I wanted to do something with a choir.
Who are your big influences when it comes to music? Do you have some favorites?
I do in the film world, definitely. I've been listening a lot to, Ennio Morricone.
Oh,
I
yeah.
love with The Mission.
Such dramatic, such film music.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, Hans Zimmer, Junkie XL. There's a whole bunch of people now that I just think, I guess I got bored with pop music, and I thought, I just think film music is so much more interesting now. There's so many interesting things happening
And I
there
love
now.
it as a genre.
Yeah.
I do listen to it in my car.
Do
It's
ya?
not just a
Yeah.
thing that I take away from the film. It's a thing that I can also look at separately. So
Yeah.
and listen to separately. So
Yeah.
what's the name of this piece?
This piece is called Bird's Eye View, and it's kind of a happy Earth Day sort of thing. In traveling, I've been able to see a lot of beautiful parks and natural beauty, and so I wanted to write something that felt like flying.
Fabulous.
So yeah, that's
This is
what
Bird's Eye
is.
View. So when I listen to that, tell me how you put that together and what that process was like, because I don't know how musicians do it. I don't know the mind of a musician. I've always marveled at it.
Probably a good thing. No,
I just can't
It's
go
such
there.
a-
I've always admired it, but I'm like, how do they do? How does this come about?
It's definitely, I think it comes about because you hear music in everything, whether it's the garbage truck coming by or, you're in your car. You hear music in people's voices. I can hear melody when people are speaking. I think, oh, that's a great melody that guy's speaking right now. So I think when everything is music, you end up, I really wanted to write this last piece. It's tinged with sadness, but it's tinged with a sense of hope and afterlife.
Yeah, it had a celestial beauty
Yeah.
kind of quality to it. And
Yeah.
when I listen to your stuff, because you're a singer-songwriter as well.
Yes.
When I listen to your music, I was listening to your record Hurricane today, and I was like, I get it, because it's got a lot of images.
Yes.
It's got a lot of this emotional overtones in the, not just in the what you're saying, but in the arrangements have specificity to them. There's specific experiences maybe tied to them, and it's also got a little bit of characterization going on where you're speaking in different voices. And so I said it's all kind of perfect for film.
Yes, it's very visual. I didn't know what it was called, but I read about it a number of years ago. Synesthesia.
Yeah,
Which
where
I
you
didn't,
see music.
where I didn't know that I had it. I see color.
You have synesthesia?
I do.
What's that like?
It's very strange, because if I see a light, or I can actually hear a tone. If I stand in front of a painting at a museum, I can tell you what the soundtrack is. I can say, oh, yeah, sure, okay. And it's just based on colors and shapes, and so It's very, very strange. But that's when I knew I had to do music for films.
Is that your quality control too? Where if you don't really feel it,
Yeah.
it's not. I mean, it seems like if you can't do it and do it honestly and do it, and if it's not going to be in tune in all those ways,
Yes,
it just doesn't sound like it's going to work.
And that's why I don't do commercials.
Yeah.
Because I did a couple of them, and I actually just started laughing. I thought, that's dreadful.
Well, okay, so I remember learning a term, the Batmanization of music and films, where you had the movie Batman, the Tim Burton version.
Yeah.
It's good, and then it's got all this great Prince music along with it.
Yes.
But it doesn't, I'm like, what is all this? I'm like, this is great, but why?
Yeah.
Like this, it was like Warner Brothers put all that music, just rammed it in there.
Yeah.
Whether it worked or not.
Yeah, music supervisors, I think that's... I do work with music supervisors. I get calls that, people are working on something and they say, oh, we can't get this Lana Del Rey or this tune by Lorde or something. And Liz, you do that dark stuff,
So they actually, that's how they communicate with you?
Yeah.
They're like, can you give us a little of that?
Yeah.
How does that, and you turn it around?
Yes.
You're a pro, you can do it.
Yeah. Or else I might have something in my catalog that will work too. So.
But when I hear a song in a movie, and you did Lifetime.
Yes.
When I hear a song in a movie, and I hear lyrics, I'm always like, well, those lyrics have something to do with what I'm watching, right?
Right.
But have you ever? But you have to turn it over, right? I mean, you
Yes.
just kind of give it to them.
Yes. Funny thing about the Lifetime, placing songs with Lifetime, is that my mother was saying, honey, what are the names of the shows that your music is in? And it's like, the titles of the movies are things like The Secret Sex Life of a Married Woman, The Pastor's Secret, all this stuff. I'm like, I don't know,
Be a great
Mom.
album
I don't really
title.
remember the titles.
Yeah, you got to call a record.
I don't know.
Yeah, the Pastor's
it's
Secret
just
Sex Files.
exactly, and
Yeah.
it was just like. But I get calls for some of the darker music, and sometimes if I show up for a session, I showed up for a session in Chicago. They had me fly in, and I walked in, and everybody turned and said, "No," and I said, "What?" They said, "Oh, we thought you'd have tattoos and piercings and stuff, because they."
Well,
they call me
how
for
are you
darker
getting
stuff.
pigeonholed? I mean, and you're also you're a woman in this field, and I mean, how are they? I mean, what's been your experience? We've talked about the Me Too stuff, but
Yeah.
we haven't really seen the full extent of that a lot of those stories haven't been uncovered in, and I'm not in the music industry.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that shoe's going to drop or not. But
Yeah.
what I was getting at is just the way that they're going to pigeonhole you as a woman in the music industry, going back to when you were first with Atlantic.
Yeah, it's always rocket fuel for me when somebody underestimates me, which is really funny. But it was exciting. It's exciting in so many fields to see like the first time that women were accepted into the NASA space program. You're like, yes, so many breakthroughs that women are having. But with film and with music, you could pigeonhole. People want you to be sexy, and it's like, okay, what? No.
So it was no longer about the music after a while.
No, it was really not about the music. It was all about what I looked like, and that's where I just said, I'm not cut out for that. So and if I'd stayed in the music business, I didn't change because I left or anything, but it just seems that I didn't want to feed that beast.
Well, people are all like, branding is so important. I'm like, I think it's kind of dangerous.
Yeah.
I think that branding might actually, you might actually get branded wrong way too early, and it'll stick with you. You'll never be able to get rid of it.
I think the focus should always be on how good the work is.
Absolutely.
So that's, when that's the focus, everything works out.
Yeah. How do you like to work with a director? Like, what's a good way of communicating? What do you like to get from a director?
I like to hear the absolute vision. What from the very, very beginning, what is somebody going for? And then it's my job to interpret the emotional side of that. So where everybody else is doing, the acting and the writing, there's this other voice. It's almost like another person narrating, and that's where the music comes in. So kind of giving the musical content and also understanding the characters and to
you
give...
speak for the characters in a way, or at least that's the way it comes off to the audience.
Yes,
Because a lot of times the protagonist, it's almost as though that music during it's always that moment where the person's driving or they're just alone and the music comes in and it seems to speak for them.
Yes, and I think that everybody is actually, people who love music are actually musicians who maybe didn't get a chance to study music or work on music, but everybody...
But aren't there so many people in this industry who are communicating with you, but do they have the vocabulary to talk to you?
Exactly, and that's where it's my job to help them get to that point, or to, Hans Zimmer does a great, he tells the story where he said, when you're talking to a director and they say, I want it bigger, I want it to be really big, no, bigger,
Worst
it's got to
direction
be
in the
huge.
world. Yeah, worst.
And then he'll say, can I try just one thing, and just come in with a dee, dee, dee. And it's like sometimes doing the opposite of what somebody's asking for can really, really help too.
But you have to follow your gut on that, don't you? And you've had to fight for some of these things before, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about that. And I didn't realize that you had this synesthesia thing, which I think is one of the most mysterious and interesting. It's a talent, but it also sounds...
It's a double-edged sword.
Abstract.
Yeah.
It's very, it's an entirely different way. Your brain is working in a different way. And I had a piano player friend of mine who describes that she sees sound in shapes. She can actually hear sound and visualize shapes taking place in 3 dimensions in her brain. You've started a podcast to sort of focus on what? It's sort of like music's effect on
the
physiology,
body.
right?
Yeah. Because I was so curious about it, and it just kept taking me to science and just explanations on. I was so curious on why music makes us cry, or what is going on.
Why is that?
Well,
what is that about that? Because I know it happens. What is it?
I think it's because it uncorks something. How we go through the day, you know how when you wake up in the morning and before you put your face on, basically, you're having very interesting thoughts. And then you put your face on and you've got your tie and
and I need to listen to music in the morning, too.
Yes.
I need it to, it grounds me.
Yeah.
It makes me happy.
Well,
it's cathartic.
Well, what's a really fun thing to do is put on some really interesting orchestral music or choir or something like that in your earbuds and walk down a city street, because all of a sudden you've added a soundtrack to your life, and
you're in a
then
movie.
exactly
like you're suddenly
right.
You're
and then that set of pigeons that just took off, you're like, that's pretty interesting. Wait, that guy who just walked past me with the coat, maybe he's up to something. It's like you've just added the soundtrack to
you're hallucinating.
Yeah.
You're
and you're like storytelling.
Yeah. No,
it's like
it's what you do, but it's essential to the creative process for so many of us, because our lives are set to music, whether we know it or not.
Right.
And so many, like I said, so many of these memorable moments from films, like I'm thinking of the way Spike Lee would use music, and an existing placed song.
Yes.
And we call that music placement, right?
Yes.
And then with the thing we were talking about earlier, the diegetic sound, which is its own thing.
Yep.
Much like the way that it's used in, I was talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where it's the song that's playing on the radio.
Right.
That comes in, and that's an effect that filmmaker uses all the time.
Absolutely.
And have you? What's been an experience? What would be one of those experiences that pushed you creatively in ways and where you were in a new world altogether? What kind of projects or things have been the most surprising, I suppose?
I think I'm humbled knowing that music is the soundtrack to other people's lives. So I don't see where musicians can get a big head about stuff or composers can get a big head, because it's really not about that.
It's not about them.
No.
Really?
So knowing.
Not everybody agrees with you.
Right.
There are a lot of musicians who
are like
who feed a persona.
Right.
But you said you tried to get away from that.
Yeah, I think performing for me, that's too much this, and that doesn't work for me. I need to just focus on doing the work.
So there was a point in
But-
time where you got away from gigging.
Yeah, I did
You play
about.
concerts, but you're not playing bars.
Yes, and I've been a live performer since I started writing when I was 10. I was in bars by the time I was 16. I got signed to Atlantic Records when I was 24, and then I was off to the races. And I've always performed my own music in bars, so it's not always the best place for original music because people want to
It's not about
hear
the music in those environments.
Right.
How do you stay? I've always I've asked my musician friends. You must sit up there and you hear all these people talking.
Yeah.
You know that there's some people who are out there like listening.
Yeah.
And totally
And I
into it.
love those people.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, there's a person who's listening, and you can see like somebody tilting their head a certain way, and it's like, oh, that person is really, really listening. So I like doing concerts, but I don't necessarily like playing bars because it's like, the tray of drinks go by and somebody's ordering a pizza, and you're like, this isn't working. So
These people came to drink, and
Yeah.
there happened to be some live music.
Yeah.
You know, it was more
yeah.
like music's in the air rather than
And
than
it's
it
kind-
being about the music. And for you,
Yeah.
it's about the music.
Yeah, absolutely. So focusing completely on the music every day has just made me incredibly happy.
Do you like playing with other people, or this one-person band thing is where it's at?
Well, when I was on Atlantic Records, I'd worked so hard to get signed, and boom, we had this $1 million deal. Boom, my band breaks up. And I thought, what? No friggin' way. So I called up some friends of mine who were at a music store, and I said, I need a computer. I need to figure out how to do this. I don't want to lose this, lose this opportunity. So for 3 months, I just I just held up and I learned keyboards and I learned, recording
But it
on
changed
a
everything.
computer.
It sounds
changed
like
everything.
it did wonders.
And that made me independent again. Instead of walking into a studio where people say, okay, oh, honey, you should be doing this, this, and this, I walk in with a full track.
Fantastic. Liz,
So-
it's such a pleasure, and I'm
It
sorry
was-
we have to wrap it up.
it
but
was a
it's just such a
blast.
fun, and I hope you'll come back sometime.
Well, it was really, really fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm Barton Bund. This is INFrame. Coming up next, we have our big talk with Douglas Trumbull. And Liz, you're fantastic. It's amazing. This was a fantastic interview, and it's just such a pleasure.
Thank you.
All
Very,
right.
very fun.
We'll see you next time.
Hildur Guten toward
You give me the finger, okay?
Okay.
Yeah. Welcome to INFrame. I'm Barton Bund, and we have our very special guest today, Mark Adler, who's actually the founder of Michigan Production Alliance. That's at mpami.org. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you
for coming in and for kicking and screaming against your will to come and sit with us. But we do have a lot going on, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are many things going on. MPA's been around since 2003, and these past, this will be the third streaming podcast that we've done. That's something new for us. We're still doing our educational things when we can. We want to incorporate more of them, which leads into what we're doing in March.
And what is that?
Michigan Association of Broadcasters has been seeing their numbers drop a little bit.
Oh, really?
And they wanted to get something a little bit different at their Great Lakes Conference in March. So we had been working with them for about almost 2 years about getting at least a boot camp up there. But
what happens in a boot camp?
Oh, that's a whole other story.
Okay.
Let me tell you about MAB first.
Okay.
Because there's 3 blocks that they're giving us. And one block will be with our technical director, Jeremy Salo, about drones and new media and field recording. Mm-hmm. And the second one with Wally Shilbaka, who is also a board member, as is Jeremy. Mm-hmm. And the third one will be the boot camp. Now, what's involved in a boot camp? It's basically an overview of the industry. How do you get into the industry if you want to? You don't have to necessarily start as a PA, but it's good to know what positions are out there and how it works. So when you walk onto a set, you know.
Coming in as a PA seems to be, well, it's where so many people begin, of course, but it's where you're learning everything and seeing everything.
Right.
And we encourage so many people who are interested to do what they can and get in there.
Sure.
But how do they get even to that point? I think that one of the best things that MPA does is link people with jobs.
Right. That's what we do. That's all part of the networking. Today at this podcast, we actually do have an audience. They're sitting back there in the dark. But hi, audience. Hey. All right, great. So, yeah, sorry, blew Jeremy's headphones off.
Yeah. So, and speaking of which, it's beyond rumors. It's out there now. But Steven Soderbergh is coming.
That's the big news. For some reason, without incentives, we've got a big film coming in.
And the film is called Kill Switch.
Kill Switch, indeed.
And it is starring the Avengers. It's got Don Cheadle. It's got Josh Brolin. And it's a Detroit-centric story.
Right, absolutely. And kind of the metamorphosis of that was that Soderbergh likes Detroit.
Yeah.
And he got one of our location scouts that's very well known. He worked on Batman. He worked on a lot of the films that have been shot here. He presented him with a number of good locations for his film. Potential
it's a 1950s
film.
Story. It's like a
set in
movie.
50s, period. Yeah.
So we'll try to keep people up to. This is all we know at this point, right?
I mean, well, right now we know that they're looking for 50s period cars.
Okay.
And soon, and we know they're crewing up. So.
And that's one of the greatest things about when local people get jobbed in, talent and crew and catering, and I mean it's a big boost for the local economy, of course, but it's also where we learn so much from, especially because we've now had a chance, local crews, some local people have had a chance to work with Zack Snyder, Catherine Bigelow, Arnaud Desplechin, and now Steven Soderbergh. I mean, these are gods of cinema.
Right. Even on the carpentry side, our carpenters learn from Hollywood carpenters or carpenters with more experience in the film industry how to do things that we normally don't do here. The example is the wagon wheels in Oz. Yeah. When we were shooting that, we didn't have that skill of bending the wood like they do. They showed us tricks. They showed, not me, but they showed the carpenters tricks about how to bend that and make it happen fast.
And learning through, because each one of these directors works in such a radically different
That's
way.
true too.
And so we've just learned. I mean, it's phenomenal. So we'll keep up with that as much as we can. This Kill Switch is going to be something different.
Yeah, it's a movie of size that'll employ a lot of people, like you say. And as far as incentives go, we're looking at a tax credit for the state of Michigan, and we hope we get something. We're seeing some movement on that, but on March 4th, there's going to be an event downtown. Look on our Facebook group page for more information about that, but it's going to be a fundraiser downtown for incentives, to help us develop the incentives. We have a PR firm that's pushing our information out there on social media, Instagram, Twitter, everywhere, and that costs money. We're trying to develop that.
Excellent. So for more, we go to mpami.org, but also the Facebook, the Michigan Production Alliance Facebook
That's
page
right.
is a fantastic resource.
Right, and we've also got a LinkedIn presence as well.
So folks,
yeah.
go check us out on these platforms, because that's the up to the minute flow of information, and it's been good. So I'm happy with the way I'm always encouraged. I'm always optimistic, and I'm always encouraged by things, but the only way we really know what's going on is to hear it from folks in the industry itself.
Yeah.
You know, it could be, I mean, you know, you can hear things coming out of Lansing, or you can hear things coming out of, you know, that there are projects in place, but it's until you talk to a real, you know, somebody who's worked on the set that you really know what's going on.
There's so many rumors, it's hard to contain, but this is,
It's real. That's good.
Yeah, it's
and
real.
and that's also one of our jobs, is to help separate out, okay, what's what here.
Yeah.
And then finally, you know, let's get into, you know, what we're presenting today.
It's so exciting, man. Doug Trumbull.
Douglas Trumbull, who I mean, just the idea, when you first said, "Oh, we're getting Doug Trumbull, you know, next time," and I said, "You mean this is Douglas Trumbull, who is
Laser focus on Barton's behalf. You were.
Well, I researched, and when I knew we were talking to him, I'm like, I better know my stuff, and I
Yeah.
want to get into some stuff that that I hadn't heard in other interviews with other people. Like, so this guy, he holds like the secrets to filmmaking as he learned it from Stanley Kubrick, Steven Spielberg, Ridley Scott, Terrence Malick, and I wanted to get into this guy's process as much as we could. And Douglas Trumbull, he is just such a pure filmmaker. He's a film director, and he sees himself as no matter where he is, whether he's doing the VFX or he's the director and writer, or whether he's creating the
New technology,
the
really.
MagiPod, the new way of seeing films altogether.
That's right.
The guy is really something. He's a real filmmaker, and this was magic to talk to him, and he was fun, and we hit it off too. He was real cool.
Absolutely. I've got to give kudos to my friend Corey Jacobson from Phoenix Theaters, because he actually developed a friendship with Doug because of the theatrical technology that he's developing, and Corey builds theaters around the country.
He even built one right in Doug's neighborhood.
Massachusetts, yeah.
In Massachusetts, so
Right.
that he could be close to him and
Right.
be in on this. No, he did. He told me
Yeah,
that, and I
yeah,
was
yeah.
just so moved.
Yeah.
And, well, Phoenix Theaters in Monroe, that's a really spectacular place where we were there that day to do a film retrospective of Doug's work. He also gave us a master class that day, but it was a way to see Blade Runner on a big screen, see Space Odyssey in a real format with real good sound and all that stuff.
Yeah,
It was
and we
nice.
hadn't seen those in many years.
I know, and you know, it's so funny because when we get away from the cinematic experience, we are losing more than half of the experience is just lost. You can get information off a small screen, but you can't get that experience.
Yeah, it's true. And filmmakers today are realizing that they have to build that film based on different size displays.
Yeah.
And it's just not the same.
And it's going to be hard to keep up with too. But here's the thing is, Douglas knows exactly what that's like, because his formats were always changing.
That's right.
And you know, throughout his time, he went from, you know, they were shooting in either 70 millimeter or, you know, smaller formats, and he's finally, you know, he's into digital at 120 frames per second.
Right, and as we'll see in the interview, just a short time from now, you drew out some information from him that I hadn't heard in the material that has been on the internet before. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
That was well done.
Good. Well, let's roll into it. This is our, you know, incredibly. It was such a coup. This is our interview with Douglas Trumbull. We recorded this back on December 5th of 2019 at Phoenix Theaters. Here's Doug Trumbull.
As a kid in high school, I was a science fiction fan.
What were your films that you loved growing up?
I started out with Destination Moon, was like one of the first ones I ever saw, you know, George Pal movie. I was blown away by Forbidden Planet, I thought was a major breakthrough sci-fi movie.
When did you start looking at those films and saying, how'd they do that?
Oh, when I was, you know, when I was very young, like 10, 12 years old. My father made it a point to make sure I saw all these movies.
He was an engineer, you've said.
He was an engineer, but he had worked in the movie industry before I was born.
Is that right?
There was something that happened with my dad. His name was Don Trumbull, and he didn't like the movie industry very much for some reason. He just finally decided to leave and went into the aircraft industry, which he thought was more orderly, I guess, or something. I was fascinated with science fiction, so I was reading a lot of Heinlein and Arthur Clarke and Asimov and all that kind of stuff. And that was my kind of alternate reality, because I was kind of escaping. My mother had died when I was very young. My father was absent. I was kind of a forlorn kid. And that was my escape, was just going into other planets and other dimensions and stuff and thinking about those kind of things. So when I started becoming artistic in art classes and stuff in school, I started painting science fiction type book cover things of spacecraft and alien planets. And so I had a portfolio full of that kind of thing. So that was one thing. And then I wanted to try to get a job after I got out of high school. I just had to go to work. I didn't have time or money to go to university or college or anything. And I took my portfolio looking for a job in LA in the animation industry, because I was fascinated by Disney animation and multiplane photography and the whole idea of one frame at a time motion. And I got directed to this company called Graphic Films in Hollywood that was doing animated kind of photorealistic films for the Air Force and NASA about the space program. And so I was working on films about the Apollo program way before they went to the moon.
And you're taking in, are these sort of like simulations?
Yeah, yeah. So they were almost photorealistic, you know, paintings of the moon, paintings of the vertical assembly building at the Cape, and paintings of Saturn V rockets. And so I was very adept at that kind of technical illustration kind of thing, and animation and the photographic end of it. And this company, Graphic Films, got a job because of their kind of special expertise on a movie called To the Moon and Beyond for the New York World's Fair, which was a 70mm movie projected into a dome screen. And I worked on all the artwork for that. And Kubrick saw that movie with Arthur Clarke at the World's Fair and immediately called Graphic Films and said, we want to make this movie, and can you help us?
Kubrick and Clarke are creating this film and creating a book and creating a mythology and a design and many things kind of at once.
Right.
What is the process like of working on that film, which is just innovation at every turn?
The whole movie was R&D. It was innovation and research and, you know, trying to break the mold. And Kubrick had a really negative attitude about B sci-fi movies that are always so trappy and crappy and low quality and exploitational and superficial. And he wanted to do something really deep and rewarding and spectacular and epic, because it was following on the heels of big 70mm epics like How the West Was Won and Gone with the Wind, and, you know, predated that. But the epic movies of the giant screen, 70mm world of Sound of Music and
Spartacus.
Well, he had done Spartacus. Yeah, that was in an unusual film format that was shot in VistaVision. And so he was adept photographically. And he wanted to do some big epic science fiction, which had never been attempted before at all. And so it was all trying to figure out how to do something new and different. And just starting from, well, how do we do stars? How do we do planets? How do we do, you know, the moon? How do we do Jupiter?
The stars in particular I understand were kind of an interesting challenge. Just figuring out how to make stars.
Yeah.
And many of those stars move what, independently or in?
No, the stars are actually spatters of white paint on shiny black paper.
Oh.
Photographed on an animation stand. That's what we settled on. It's not like we didn't try every other way to go. We drilled holes in sheets of aluminum.
And lit through it.
And lit behind it and everything. Because the whole idea of having stars that look credible and believable and would be, you know, like the real night sky was very tricky. And that was one of the most interesting first experiments we did, was moving stars across the screen.
Yeah.
Because we found out right away, very early on in the production, that if you move stars too fast, they became double stars.
Okay.
We said, well, we didn't shoot double stars. What is this? Because we were shooting animation. So each frame is dead sharp. There's no blurring on the frames at all. And when you moved them too fast, you got double stars, and we're saying, well, what's that? Well, we found out that was because of the double-bladed shutter in projectors. Film projectors show each frame twice. So your retina is retaining each frame, and you're seeing more than one frame. And I said, oh, wow, this is pretty interesting about persistence of vision and the fundamentals of cinema, how it all works, how a movie moves. And
well, you currently work with frame rates and
I've been
think
fascinated with it ever since. But there was such incredible attention to detail and quality control from Kubrick.
What's he like?
He was amazing.
Yeah.
A genius.
Yeah.
One of the biggest genius guys I've ever met in my life.
How does he communicate with departments? You know, when he goes to you and says, this is what I'd like, or did he actually come to you and say, he came to you at one point and said, how do we do it? How do we do that, right?
Yeah, it happened all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it just turned out that he was generally frustrated by people who did things the same way that their entire careers.
Mm-hmm.
Same photography, same camera, same lens, same style, same whatever. And he just wanted to completely break the mold. He said, if we're doing it that way, I want you to do it that way. Just do the opposite. Whatever everybody else is doing, let's do something completely different. That was his basic attitude.
But it was also what was correct. I mean, that's the thing. He knew that he was establishing a style. Well, you guys were doing something for the first time, so it's kind of...
He was willing to explore and take a chance and fail. You know, when you take a chance and you do experiment, most of the time it doesn't work.
And there were a lot of things I'm sure you had to throw away.
Oh, yeah. I had kind of been exhausted by Kubrick because he was a very, very demanding guy.
Yeah.
I fulfilled his wildest dreams. It was a very happy relationship. I'm not complaining at all. But after that, I said, well, I can do that too. I was full of myself. I could direct a movie or write a story.
Too? You were still a young guy.
I started on 2001 when I was 23.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think I was 26, 27 when I was starting to enter into silent running. And anyway, I said, well, I'm going to try to do a movie that'll be what I know how to do with miniatures and visual effects, and I can build all this stuff. And the objective is to make a movie that looks credible science fiction, but has some heart to it, not the cold, repellent, HAL 9000 electronic kind of thing that 2001 was about. I wanted something that had some human emotion and stuff to it. And I also wanted a very small cast, because I was a learner. I was going to be dealing with actors for the first time in my life, and Mike Gruskoff and I selected Bruce Dern after looking at many other actors. And that was film school for me. Again, directing school. And we're surrounded by some really good seasoned cinematographers and production designers and assistant director and stuff on the set. And they're teaching me how to make a movie, because I'd never gone to film school. They said, well, this is the stage line. You got to have these two guys on the left and these two guys on the right, and then it'll intercut, and he looks left and that. You establish the kind of the language of film, which was like easy. Anyway, the big epiphany I had in the making of Silent Running, and particularly with Bruce Dern, was he's a method actor, so he's drawing on emotional material he's got in his history to perform in a certain way in a certain scene. He's adapting life experiences to acting. And I said, okay, I understand that. That makes perfectly good sense to me. But what I found out in the big picture of making Silent Running is that working with actors and directing live action is the easiest part of making a movie. The hardest part is doing something really unusual and extraordinary and difficult and visually challenging, which was spacecraft and interstellar space and explosions and all the kind of stuff that's not ordinary. I categorize movies into two basic categories. One is what I call grounded movies. Cop chase thriller movies, love stories, historical dramas, whatever. It's all here on this planet. But there's another kind of movie which is looking up and thinking about the universe and thinking about infinity and thinking about life and contact with aliens and all kinds of other stuff, which I find really intriguing and satisfying. Terry, we were old friends. We knew each other way back from when he made his first films and I made Silent Running, and we knew each other back at Universal. And he was planning to make this Tree of Life movie and another movie back-to-back called Voyage of Time. And he was very frustrated because he was hiring universities and supercomputing labs to do simulations of galaxies colliding and stuff, the birth of the universe. And he said, I see all this stuff and it's absolutely scientifically perfect, but it's boring. It just doesn't look beautiful. There's something about it that doesn't look compellingly beautiful. And he said, I want to go back to the good old days of 2001 and tank shots and liquids in tanks and find ways to do things that are extemporaneous. Because said he was always looking for what he called the Tao, the unexpected, the magical moment that you could capture on film.
That seems to be a thing that's disappearing among a lot of effects films, is that sense of spontaneity. There's so much control within a frame.
It's pretty much gone, yeah.
But that's what I was looking at. I'm like, here we have liquids and gases and we have fire and we have these elements that are actually performing for us that you may not have even known the result of mixing these.
You never know exactly
components.
what's going to happen. That's the wonderful thing. Is that if you do computer graphics, as an example, it's based on algorithms, mathematical algorithms that are written in code that do a certain thing and perform a certain function. But if you do something in a tank, you get the unexpected. You get stuff that happens that you couldn't even possibly plan, that's based on specific gravity and viscosity. And I really admire his kind of extemporaneous film style, because he's improvising on the set all the time, right up to the last minute of photography. He's changing the dialogue. He's blocking the actors differently.
How did he tell you what he wanted from you?
He couldn't exactly.
Okay.
So, see, I'm a very methodical guy. I learned with Kubrick that if you want to do something extraordinary, you have to plan it.
But he's not handing you a script, right?
No. Well, it was very vague. I never had a full script of Tree of Life. Yeah.
Okay.
But for Kubrick, it was very planned and very methodical and very organized and very orderly. With Terry, he says, no, let's just find something that we don't know is going to happen. And one of the best examples I'll give you was this crazy day, because I would go on these long weekends to Austin, Texas. He would rent hire a crew of people and rent a kind of a warehouse space. Mm-hmm. And we would just find paints and had a big tank of water and some high-speed cameras. And he said, well, let's just improvise and see what happens. And I said, okay, well, what do you want to do? And he says, no, come on, let's not think about it. Just don't think about it too hard. I'm going to get a 55-gallon trash can, and I'm going to put dry ice in the bottom of it and some water, and it's going to make CO2. And then we're going to throw a road flare in there and see what happens when the road flare interacts with the dry ice, hot and cold, and it's going to create turbulence. And I just want the camera in there when that happens.
And that's your big bang?
Well, it was part of it. And there were moments that came out of that were stunningly beautiful.
Was that the development, or was that the final? Is that you shot the big bang in a trash can?
Part of it.
Okay, all right. See.
And so you get the Dow, you get what Terry wants, which is something that you could not plan.
Yeah, and I'm going to move on to Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which we're here to celebrate today,
right.
Which is the most Trumbull out of any of the Star Treks in terms of the expansiveness of that creature that was out, the entity, the thing, the cloud, the thing out in space, which we never saw the beginning or the end of. I thought that was a clever way of doing it.
You never want to show too much.
Well, but
leave something up to the imagination of the audience.
It looked infinite and endless to me.
Good.
The orifice, that six-sided. Now there are a lot of hexagons in the design.
Right.
I noticed that. Was that a thing that you talked about, or?
That came from a guy named Ron Resch, who is no longer alive, a visionary artist, who was an architect really, and into changing forms, folding forms. He was kind of beyond origami. He figured out how to do things like that, like the orifice that had to open and close had to be like a seal, like a door, but it had to be dimensional, and it had to be an aperture.
And it twists.
Yeah, so there were these 6 cone-shaped things, and instead of mounting the cones on the shaft through the center of the cone, he mounted the shaft through the edge of the cone. So the cones kind of roll and create kind of an iris effect, like the iris in a camera. And it was beautifully ingenious.
It's like nothing else. But what's the size and the scope of that thing, and how many effects are going on inside of that one frame? Because I see lighting effects going on, and I see, but it's all right through the camera. That's
it's all in camera. Yeah, there was, metal, plexiglass, rubber, all kinds of stuff to build the model. And then the articulated motors that would rotate everything to create the aperture opening and things like that. And then thousands of fiber optic lines coming into the set from light sources off the set. And then smoking the whole thing up, which was the technique we developed for the mothership in Close Encounters.
Which
creates that atmospheric nebulosity and the kind of mystery to the whole thing. It's just totally different from, those miniatures look horrible without the smoke.
Is that right?
Yeah. So it's the smoke that's creating the magic.
How much freedom did the director give you?
Tremendous freedom, because Bob Wise, who is a wonderful band and a wonderful director, he's no longer with us, but he had directed West Side Story, which I really admired as a film, Sound of Music. He was hired because of that quality of the kind of epic giant screen spectacle, which they wanted to bring to Star Trek. And so he was the right director for that. But in terms of visual effects, I already knew, because I'd done Andromeda Strain with him previously, that he didn't understand visual effects or technology very much at all. And so I said, Bob, well, I'm a director, and I can take on these scenes for you. And I would like to just direct them myself, and just give me these little sequences and I'll design them and direct them and deliver them. And he was very gracious. He said, yeah, fine, do that. I trust you. Go for it. Because, you know, there was so much a story about the making of the movie and all the trouble and the delay and how far behind it was and how hard it was. So everybody just had to get out of the way and let us do our thing. And there were movie moments in that were just terrible.
What do you mean?
Well, they did this kind of spacewalk scene that had been shot before I came onto the picture that was just abysmally impossible to fix. And it looked like guys hanging on wires. It just looked stupid. And I told Bob, I said, listen, this is unsalvageable. And it's actually not very exciting. And I can't fix it for you, but I want to redesign the entire sequence. So that was what we call the Spock spacewalk, where Spock decides to risk his life and go into the interstices of the Voyager spacecraft and figure out what it is. And I said, well, I think that this is the moment in the movie where we've got to transcend literal reality. We've got to go into something that's more trippy, like 2001 was.
Is that the word you use? I didn't mean to throw that out
You know,
there.
it's a perfectly good word.
It's a good one because it means the poetry of the motion of the effect and the way it makes an impression on the brain. It
and
really
that's kind of
gets
my art form.
Yeah.
I never do drugs or anything. I don't do psychedelics, never have. But the idea of delivering something on the screen that creates a hallucinatory kind of beyond reality thing,
Yeah.
I love doing that.
Was that the intention of 2001? Was that the intention of these? Because it sure connected with its audience.
Yeah. I mean, you go back to the original Journey Beyond the Stars. Well, what the hell is that? Well, my objective after all these 50 years of dealing with all these different movies and meeting a lot of really interesting directors and working with very super talented people, I realized that there are great film directors, great writers, great producers, great actors and actresses that can make movies as we know them, right? They can make movies. The big question that I have raised now, and I've been working on it for years, is how do we actually change the medium itself? Why do we have to assume that a movie is a rectangular, flat, two-dimensional image at the end of a box, a room with rows of seats that are straight? Why does it have to be that way? Can't we do something bigger, better, and more spectacular? Which is I got a taste of it in 2001 with Cinerama and 70 millimeter, these deeply curved 90-foot wide
You
screens.
started with the idea of immersion.
Yeah.
It was always the idea, and I think it was
Yeah.
always the essential element. You can't watch Space Odyssey on my phone.
Yeah, no, it makes no sense.
No.
And so what I realized that there's fundamental differences between media. Like television is a story medium. Because the screen is relatively small, but you can tell a story, beginning, middle, and end. Something evolves, someone chases someone loves someone kills someone, there's a mystery, whatever. That's a story. If you want to create an experience that's an immersive, spectacular, all-engrossing thing, you got to make the screen much bigger. You got to make the quality of the image much higher. You got to make the frame rate much faster. You got to do a whole bunch of things.
Where are
to
we going
create
wrong
immersion.
with the frame rates these days? Do you feel like, because that is when a high frame rate film comes into the theaters now, people are feeling a little thrown off by the vividness and the
Because they're not doing it right. They just don't understand it.
What's the missing?
It's very simple.
Yeah.
It's the shutter.
Okay.
Film has had a shutter in the camera for 100 years. You have to close the shutter. It's a rotating disc that closes in front of the gate of film so the film can be advanced to the next frame. Okay, that's the shutter in the camera. So half the time the shutter's open, half the time the shutter's closed. So the movie is only capturing half of the action. That movie is then projected through a projector that has a double-bladed shutter, so each frame is shown twice. Okay, now, very few people even know this, but I'm so geeky I get into it, is that they invented the double-bladed shutter in order to get rid of flicker. That's why movies used to be called the flicks, or the flickers, because without the double-bladed shutter, they flicker badly, particularly for the silent films at 16 or 18 frames a second. It was really flashing on and off objectionably. Double-bladed shutter gets you there. But that standard of 24 frames, which we all think is cinema, has been with the industry for about 100 years now. And it was established for the jazz singer in 1924 for talking movies. That has stabilized the speed of the film to have a soundtrack on there. And we've stuck with it ever since, and we think it's cinematic. What I've realized is the shutter in photography and the shutter in projection that creates what we think is cinema. But if you eliminate the shutter, which is what digital projectors do, Digital projectors in theaters have no shutter. Digital cameras have no shutters. If you leave that out of the equation, what you get is video. You don't get cinema. It just, we can tell the difference in an instant. You can show a second of video and a second of a feature film, and you can tell the difference instantaneously. Our perceptive capacities are very refined. And so if you leave the shutter out, you get a video look. That's what Ang Lee has been doing, is going to very high frame rates, which he learned from me, but he's been doing it without a shutter. So that's what happens for Billy Lynn, that's what happened with Gemini Man. And it has this video fluidity to it that's just not comfortable as cinema, in my opinion. It just doesn't work.
It adds it adds an extra layer to it that takes us out in
it
an odd
makes
way.
you aware of the medium itself and the artifice of the whole thing, because suspension of disbelief is one of the magical things that happens in cinema. And I don't know how the heck it works, but it works great. And that shutter closing, and then the next frame is in a new position, is part of suspension of disbelief.
You make it sound really easy.
I'm trying to make it sound easy, but I'm just saying it's really fundamental and simple. And this is the territory I'm in right now. I'm doing 120 frames with shutters, and it looks like cinema. You're going to see a demo here, this Ufotog thing I'm showing here.
Well, you're here with us all day today, and we're out of time.
Okay, man.
I got to
Right.
join you in your masterclass next.
All right,
but
that's
this
going to be
has been
fun.
such a pleasure to talk about where these influential films, but also to see that you never stopped working towards that, enhancing that experience.
I'm not ever going to stop. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Still working on it. Getting the money is the hard part.